The night before my medical school interview, my stepmother looked me dead in the eye and poured industrial bleach directly over my only professional jacket. She told me to stop making a scene because it was just cheap fabric. But it was not just fabric. It was my late father's vintage coat. I wore it anyway, with the bleach stains spreading across the chest like a toxic blooming flower. When I walked into the interview, the head of the department looked at the ruined jacket and then at my last name. His expression shifted from judgment to absolute shock. He asked me if I was Julian Jackson's daughter. Before I tell you how a ruined piece of clothing helped me reclaim my stolen generational wealth, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you believe karma always collects its debts. The sharp smell of bleach burned my nostrils as it pooled across the white marble kitchen island. I stood frozen, clutching my anatomy textbook. Veronica, my stepmother, stood opposite me holding the empty bottle with a perfectly manicured hand. She tilted her head, offering a cold, calculated smile. "Oops," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I guess you cannot wear that garbage to your interview tomorrow. Maya, do not leave cheap things lying around." I stared at the navy blue fabric soaking up the corrosive liquid. That jacket was the only piece of professional clothing I owned. More importantly, it was the only thing I had left that belonged to my late father. When he had passed away 3 years ago, Veronica cleared out his closet overnight. She forced me to dye the specific jacket navy blue, claiming the original color was too flashy. I reached out to grab the jacket, but a heavy hand slammed down right next to my fingers. Preston, my stepsister Brianna's husband, leaned over the counter. He adjusted a limited edition gold watch that cost more than my entire college tuition. He bought it with money siphoned from my father's accounts. "Do not look so angry, Maya." Preston scoffed, his voice carrying that familiar tone of unearned privilege. "A blood draw tech does not need a tailored blazer anyway." I pulled my jacket away from the puddle, holding the ruined fabric against my chest. "I work as a clinical assistant." Preston rolled his eyes. "No, you got a pity interview to fill diversity quotas. Brianna and I are hosting the hospital investment board tonight, pitching a massive medical tech buyout. We cannot have you walking around this estate looking like a charity case. You embarrass my wife." "This historic estate belonged to my father," I reminded him. "Dr. Julian Jackson bought this brownstone to keep our legacy alive. It is not a backdrop for your parties." Veronica slammed the bottle down. "Your father left this house to me, Maya. He trusted me to manage the Jackson estate. You are still playing with test tubes, begging for a chance to go to medical school. You should be grateful I let you live in the basement. Clean up this mess before my guests arrive. I want you out of sight." She walked out, leaving the scent of expensive perfume mixing with chlorine. Preston chuckled, finishing his bourbon. He gave me a condescending pat on the shoulder. "Listen to your stepmother, Maya. Wipe down the counters. I will leave $100 bill on the hall table. Go buy yourself something from the discount rack tomorrow." He strolled out, whistling. I was left alone, shivering despite the heat of the oven. For 3 years, I watched them drain my father's bank accounts, buy luxury cars and throw lavish parties, while I worked double shifts just to pay for my medical school applications. They treated me like an unwanted stray in the home my ancestors had built. They thought stripping away my father's assets would force me to surrender. But they clearly did not understand the blood that ran in my veins. I walked to the sink and turned on the cold water. I held the jacket under the stream, hoping to wash away the chemical. The dark navy dye Veronica had forced me to use began to bleed, turning the water gray. I scrubbed the chest panel, my knuckles turning raw. I refused to cry. Crying was exactly what Veronica wanted. She wanted me to walk into that interview tomorrow feeling defeated. She wanted me to fail so she could finally kick me out without any legal opposition from her successful stepdaughter. As I scrubbed, the harsh chemical reaction started to do something unexpected. The cheap navy dye dissolved entirely under the friction. The top layer of the fabric peeled back slightly, revealing the original structure. I stopped scrubbing. My breath caught in my throat. Beneath the ruined patch, the bleach had eaten away the dark color but had not destroyed the thick embroidery hidden underneath. Shimmering gold threads began to catch the light. I carefully pulled the fabric apart, my heart hammering against my ribs. Veronica forced me to dye this jacket because she said the original design was too flashy, but she did not know what was actually stitched into the breast pocket. The gold threads formed a meticulous, intricate crest. It was a caduceus symbol wrapped in a double helix, and right beneath the crest, stitched in flawless golden lettering, were the words, Jackson Medical Innovations. This was not just a vintage coat. This was my father's original laboratory jacket from the day he patented his first cellular filtration technology. The same technology Preston and Veronica were trying to sell to the hospital board tonight, claiming he left it to them. I ran my thumb over the gold lettering. The bleach had not ruined my jacket. It had resurrected it. It revealed the undeniable proof of my legacy. A legacy they were trying to steal right out from under me. I turned off the faucet. I did not need a new blazer. I was going to wear this exact jacket to my interview tomorrow. I would walk into that hospital wearing the crest of the man who built their foundation. They wanted to erase my father's true heir. But tomorrow the medical board would see exactly who I was. The game was finally about to change. I had not slept. The sun began peeking through the basement windows. I stood in front of the small cracked mirror and pulled the damp jacket over my shoulders. The harsh smell of industrial bleach instantly burned my eyes, but I ignored it. The chemical had done its job perfectly. The cheap dark dye Veronica forced me to apply years ago was stripped away from the left side of my chest. In its place, the original fabric was exposed, revealing the intricate gold threads of my father's crest. Jackson Medical Innovations. The name caught the light. I smoothed the lapel, took a deep breath, and grabbed my bag. I had exactly 1 hour to make it across the city for my medical board interview. When I pushed open the heavy wooden door, I found the driveway completely blocked. Brianna parked her pristine white Range Rover diagonally across the concrete, trapping my sedan. The luxury SUV had been purchased with funds drained directly from my father's accounts. I looked at my watch, realizing I had 45 minutes to get to the medical board building. I did not waste another second. I turned around and started running down the long, winding driveway, leaving my trapped car behind. The sprint to the bus stop left my lungs burning. The damp fabric of the bleached jacket clung to my skin, but I refused to take it off. I climbed aboard the city bus, paying my fare with loose change. As I walked down the aisle, the heavy scent of bleach followed me. People stared at the massive discolored stains spreading across my chest, but I kept my chin high. I found a spot near the back and held onto the metal pole. Underneath my fingers, I could feel the raised gold embroidery of my father's legacy. Dr. Julian Jackson was a brilliant man who had built a biotech empire from nothing. Now, a privileged white finance bro who married my stepsister was trying to sell that legacy to the highest bidder. I was not going to let that happen. When the bus finally arrived downtown, I stepped off onto the busy pavement. The medical board building towered above me, a massive structure of pristine glass and steel. This was where my father had presented his very first clinical trial. I walked through the revolving doors and stepped into the expansive marble lobby. Almost immediately, I heard a familiar, arrogant voice echoing across the open space. I stopped in my tracks. Right in the center of the lobby was Preston. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit, his hair perfectly styled. He was laughing warmly with 3 older men in expensive business suits, the hospital board directors. The Jackson cellular filter is going to completely revolutionize your oncology department, gentlemen, Preston was saying, his tone smooth and persuasive. As the sole legal executor of the Jackson estate, I am fully prepared to sign the exclusivity rights over to you today. We are looking at a very profitable partnership. The board directors nodded eagerly, clearly charmed by his confident pitch. I felt a surge of pure disgust. Preston was selling my father's life work for $100 million, claiming it as his own. I tightened my grip on my bag and stepped forward. He never entrusted you with anything, Preston. I said, my voice cutting clearly through the quiet lobby. The board directors turned around in surprise. Preston stiffened. He slowly turned his head to look at me, and the charming smile instantly vanished from his face. He took in my damp hair, the exhausted look in my eyes, and the massive bleach stain dominating my jacket. His eyes flared with panic and anger, but he masked it quickly. He raised his hand and signaled the two security guards standing near the reception desk. "Gentlemen, I am so sorry about this interruption," Preston said, turning back to the board directors with a look of deep fake sympathy. "This is my sister-in-law, Maya. She is tragically unwell. She failed out of her undergraduate program years ago and has been having severe mental health episodes ever since her father died. We have been trying to get her into a psychiatric facility." The two security guards hurried over, closing the distance quickly. "I am not unwell," I said, standing my ground. "I am here for my official medical school interview, and you have no legal right to sell my father's patent." Preston shook his head sadly, acting the part of the concerned family member perfectly. "There is no interview, Maya. You are confused again." He looked at the guards. "Gentlemen, please escort her out gently before she hurts herself. My wife is very worried about her." The security guards grabbed my arms, pulling me backward. "Let me go," I demanded, struggling against their grip. "I have a scheduled appointment." "Just take her outside," Preston instructed, turning his back to me. "We will continue our discussion upstairs, gentlemen." The guards began dragging me toward the revolving doors. I dug my heels into the marble floor, fighting to stay in the lobby. Suddenly, the polished silver doors of the private executive elevator dinged open. A tall, distinguished man with graying hair stepped out, holding a thick stack of medical files. It was Dr. Harrison Grant, the legendary head of the medical board, and the man scheduled to conduct my interview. He stopped when he saw the commotion in the lobby. "What exactly is going on here?" Dr. Grant demanded, his authoritative voice echoing off the marble walls. He walked forward and locked eyes with me. His gaze swept over my face and then dropped down to the massive bleached stain on my chest. The harsh chemical had eaten away every trace of the cheap navy dye, leaving the bright, unmistakable gold embroidery completely exposed. Dr. Grant stopped dead in his tracks. The stack of medical files slipped slightly in his hands. All the color drained from his face as he stared at the golden crest. His eyes traced the caduceus symbol and the words Jackson Medical Innovations woven perfectly into the fabric. "Wait," he said, his voice slowly dropping to a completely shocked whisper in the quiet room. He looked from the bright golden crest up to my eyes, searching my face for confirmation. "That crest means you are Julian Jackson's true daughter." The heavy silence in the grand marble lobby was absolute. The two security guards who had been gripping my arms so tightly suddenly loosened their hold. Their eyes shifted nervously between me and Dr. Harrison Grant. Preston let out a harsh, forced laugh that echoed awkwardly off the high ceilings. He took a quick step forward, trying to physically block Dr. Grant from getting any closer to me. "Harrison, please do not pay any attention to this," Preston said, his voice slick with that practiced corporate charm. "Like I told the board, my sister-in-law is deeply unwell. She bought that jacket at a thrift store and is having a severe manic episode. Security is handling it right now." Dr. Grant did not even look at Preston. His sharp gray eyes remained locked entirely on my chest, where the bleach had eaten away the cheap navy dye. He stepped around Preston as if the man was nothing more than a piece of furniture. "Let her go," Dr. Grant commanded, his voice carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. "Release her right this second, or you will both be looking for new jobs by noon." The security guards immediately dropped their hands and stepped backward, melting into the background. I stood tall, smoothing the damp fabric of my jacket. I could feel the cold air of the lobby hitting the wet bleach stain, but I did not shiver. I met Dr. Grant's gaze directly. "You are Julian Jackson's daughter," Dr. Grant said, his voice trembling slightly. He raised a shaking finger toward the gold-embroidered crest exposed on my breast pocket. The caduceus symbol and the double helix gleamed brightly against the ruined fabric. "I am Maya Jackson," I said, my voice steady and clear so that every single person in the massive lobby could hear me. Julian Jackson was my father, and this was his original laboratory jacket. Dr. Grant closed his eyes for a brief second as if processing a profound shock. When he opened them again, they were filled with a mixture of deep sorrow and sudden fierce anger. "I know this jacket," he said quietly. "Your father wore this exact coat during our residency together. He stitched that golden crest himself. He used to tell me that one day Jackson Medical Innovations would not just be a dream stitched on a pocket, but a reality that would change the medical world. He wanted to build an empire that would protect and serve our communities. He wanted to build generational wealth that could never be stolen or erased by men in expensive suits." Preston's face turned a violent shade of crimson. "This is a ridiculous stunt," Preston practically shouted, dropping his polished demeanor entirely. "She is a fraud, Harrison. She is a failed student trying to extort my family." Dr. Grant finally turned to look at Preston. The warmth in the older doctor's eyes vanished completely, replaced by a chilling clinical coldness. "A fraud," Dr. Grant repeated, stepping toward the group of wealthy board directors, who were watching the scene unfold in stunned silence. "Preston here is pitching a massive biotech sale to us today, Maya. He is attempting to sell the Jackson cellular filter patent to our hospital network for $100 million. The number hung in the air like a physical weight. $100 million. My breath hitched. I knew Veronica and Preston were greedy, but I had no idea the sheer magnitude of what they were trying to steal from my father's legacy. They were attempting to cash out his life's work and erase my family name forever." Dr. Grant addressed the entire lobby, his voice ringing out with righteous fury. "In order to initiate this sale, Preston submitted sworn legal affidavits to our legal department. He swore on penalty of perjury that Dr. Julian Jackson passed away without any living biological heirs. He provided documents stating that the entire Jackson estate and all intellectual property defaulted solely to his wife Brianna and her mother Veronica." The board directors began murmuring among themselves, exchanging alarmed glances. One of the men in a gray suit took a physical step away from Preston, shaking his head in obvious disgust. "You lied to us, Preston." Dr. Grant said, his tone dripping with absolute contempt. "You looked me in the eye and told me my oldest friend died without a legacy. You told me his bloodline ended, and now his biological daughter is standing right in front of me wearing his crest." Preston panicked. His entire entitled facade cracked and shattered right there on the marble floor. The unearned confidence of a man who had always been handed everything suddenly gave way to cornered desperation. His white privilege could no longer shield him from the undeniable truth standing in front of him. He realized he was losing the biggest deal of his life, and he could not handle it. "She was disinherited," Preston yelled, his voice cracking as he pointed an accusing finger at me. "Julian left her nothing because she is a failure. She failed out of her undergraduate program. She works as a glorified maid drawing blood for minimum wage. She does not belong in a building like this. She does not belong in this room. We own the rights. Veronica owns the house. We own the patent." His coded language and desperate insults meant nothing to me anymore. I did not flinch. I just stood there, letting him expose his own greedy, toxic nature to the very men he was trying to impress. The men who held the $100 million check. Dr. Grant completely ignored Preston's screaming tantrum. He turned his back on the frantic finance broker and looked gently at me. "You have your father's eyes, Maya," Dr. Grant said softly. "And clearly you have his fire too. It is an honor to finally meet you." He turned back to the board of directors. "Gentlemen, this meeting is suspended immediately. All negotiations regarding the Jackson cellular filter are frozen, pending a full and thorough fraud investigation by our legal team. We will not be doing business with liars." Preston lunged forward, grabbing Dr. Grant's sleeve. "You cannot do this. Harrison, we have a verbal agreement. You cannot let this crazy girl ruin a $100 million deal. Do you know who my family is?" Dr. Grant ripped his arm away from Preston's grip with such force that Preston stumbled backward. "Do not ever touch me again," Dr. Grant warned softly. "And do not ever disrespect Julian Jackson's daughter in my hospital. Security, make sure he leaves the premises immediately." Dr. Grant placed a protective hand on my shoulder, guiding me away from the chaotic scene. "Come with me, Maya," he said. We have a great deal to discuss, and we need to do it somewhere safe. He escorted me past the bewildered security guards and the whispering board members. We stepped into the polished silver elevator, leaving Preston screaming in the middle of the lobby, his face purple with rage, as his massive payday slipped through his fingers. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off Preston's frantic shouting and bringing a sudden peaceful silence. We rode up to the top floor of the building. My heart was pounding against my ribs, but I felt an overwhelming sense of vindication. I had walked into the lion's den wearing a bleached and ruined jacket, and I had completely halted their theft. Dr. Grant led me down a quiet, carpeted hallway and unlocked the door to his private corner office. It was a beautiful, expansive room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. He ushered me inside, walking over to his heavy mahogany desk. He did not ask me to sit down just yet. Instead, he turned around, pulled the heavy oak door completely shut, and engaged the deadbolt, locking us safely inside. He looked at me with a serious, intense expression, knowing the battle had only just begun. Dr. Grant walked to his desk and gestured for me to sit. I sank into the leather chair, clutching my bag. The bleached jacket felt heavy, but the gold crest burned with a comforting warmth. Dr. Grant opened a locked drawer, pulling out manila folders and laying them across the polished wood. He told me that for the past 3 years, he genuinely believed I had walked away from my father's legacy by choice. Veronica and Preston told the medical board you were estranged from your father. Dr. Grant explained, his voice heavy with regret. They submitted documents claiming you were struggling with severe addiction and mental health issues. They painted a picture of a tragic daughter who wanted nothing to do with science. They said you took a cash settlement and disappeared. I listened in absolute horror. While I was drowning in grief, my stepmother was systematically assassinating my character. I told Dr. Grant I never took a dime from them. I had been living in the damp basement of my own home, working double shifts just to pay for my medical school applications. Dr. Grant shook his head, pushing the first folder toward me. I opened it and saw pages of patent applications and corporate restructuring documents. My father's company, Jackson Medical Innovations, had been dissolved and absorbed into a new shell corporation owned entirely by Preston. They hijacked his life work while you were mourning, Maya, Dr. Grant said, pointing to a specific legal document. They took his cellular filtration technology and rebranded it. The technology your father designed to purify contaminated blood supplies is now being auctioned off as a luxury anti-aging treatment. They are stripping his invention to line their pockets with $100 million. Bile rose in my throat. My father had dedicated his life to that filtration system. He spent countless nights sacrificing sleep to finalize a patent that could save millions. And Preston, a man who could not even pass basic biology, was selling it off to buy luxury cars. I asked Dr. Grant how they managed to bypass the legal protections my father had in place. He never left his intellectual property vulnerable. A proud smile broke through the grim expression on Dr. Grant's face. He tapped a thick technical manual at the bottom of the stack. "Your father was brilliant, Maya," he said, leaning forward. He knew Veronica was greedy and isolating him in his final months. He could not change his primary will without triggering a massive legal battle, but he could protect his greatest invention. Dr. Grant opened the manual to a page filled with complex binary code. He explained that my father had secretly altered the master source code just weeks before he died. He baked a poison pill into the patent source code. Dr. Grant revealed, his eyes shining with admiration for his late friend. The physical prototypes and the basic blueprints are accessible to the estate executors. Preston and Veronica have those. That is what they use to pitch the sale today. But the actual operational algorithm, the core sequence that makes the entire technology function, is locked behind an unbreakable biometric firewall. It cannot be legally sold, transferred, or activated without the direct biometric signature of his biological heir. The realization hit me like a physical shockwave. My father had programmed the ultimate failsafe, anchoring his legacy directly to my DNA. The gold crest on my bleached jacket was not just a symbol of my heritage. It was a reminder that I was the living key to the Jackson Empire. I asked Dr. Grant why Preston was trying to finalize the sale today if he knew the technology was locked. Dr. Grant explained that corporate buyers rarely look at the deep source code until the final asset transfer. Preston was trying to secure the payout first and bypass the lock later. But my appearance in the lobby completely destroyed his timeline. Suddenly, a frantic pounding echoed against the locked oak door. Dr. Grant frowned and stood up. He unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. His executive assistant burst into the office, clutching a tablet tightly against her chest. She looked terrified. "Dr. Grant?" she said, her voice trembling as she struggled to catch her breath. "I am so sorry to interrupt, but our legal department just received an emergency notification from the city courthouse. It concerns Mr. Preston and the Jackson estate." Dr. Grant demanded to know what was happening. The assistant looked at me with deep pity before turning the tablet around to show us the screen. Preston just filed an emergency legal injunction claiming his sister-in-law is mentally incompetent and a danger to herself, she explained rapidly. He brought a sworn psychiatric evaluation directly to a judge. The evaluation is signed by her stepmother, Veronica, detailing a long history of severe psychological instability and violent outbursts. I felt the blood drain from my face. Veronica was using the fake narrative she had built over the last 3 years to legally erase my autonomy. I told Dr. Grant that the evaluation was completely forged. I had never seen a psychiatrist in my life. I had never had a violent outburst. This was their desperate backup plan. "If the judge signs that injunction declaring you incompetent, your biometric rights are transferred to your legal guardians," Dr. Grant said, his voice dropping into an urgent whisper. "Preston and Veronica will become your medical proxies. They will legally own your signature. They can authorize the bypass of the poison pill code and sell the patent today." The assistant checked her watch, her hands shaking. "The emergency hearing is happening right now," she warned us. "The judge is scheduled to review the forged documents and sign the final order of incompetence at exactly 5 o'clock this evening. If that signature hits the paper, Preston wins everything." I looked past Dr. Grant toward the grandfather clock standing in the corner of his elegant office. The brass pendulum swung back and forth with a rhythmic tick that sounded like a countdown. The golden hands on the face were perfectly aligned. It was exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I had exactly 2 hours to prove my sanity, stop a fraudulent court order, and protect my father's legacy before Veronica and Preston legally stole my entire life. The video ended abruptly, freezing on my father's weary but determined face. I sat in the quiet diner booth, paralyzed by the sheer horror of what I had just heard. Veronica had murdered my father for money, and Preston had helped her cover it up. They had treated me like garbage while living in a house paid for by a man they killed. Suddenly, a loud mechanical chime echoed from my laptop speakers. A red progress bar appeared at the very bottom of the screen. I watched in total shock as a system notification flashed across the display, stating that the drive was automatically pinging an external server. The biometric lock had triggered an automatic upload sequence. The green progress bar filled the bottom of the screen completely, and a sharp electronic chime echoed from my laptop speakers. The screen went entirely black again, locking down all the files behind the biometric firewall. I sat frozen in the greasy diner booth, the sound of my own harsh breathing drowning out the soft hum of the neon sign outside. Before I could even begin to process the horrifying reality that my father had been murdered, my cell phone vibrated violently against the cracked Formica table. An unknown number flashed across the bright screen. I stared at the flashing digits for a long second, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans and swiped the screen to answer. "Hello?" I said, my voice trembling slightly in the quiet room. "Is this Maya Jackson?" A sharp, authoritative woman asked, her words clipping through the receiver with intense precision. "Yes, who is this?" I asked, tightening my grip on the phone. "My name is Harper Reed," the woman said, her tone crisp and completely devoid of any polite warmth. "I am a senior managing partner at Reed & Sterling Corporate Law. Your father paid me a very generous retainer exactly 5 years ago." He instructed me to wait in total silence for a specific encrypted ping from a private biometric server. That ping just hit my system 2 minutes ago. Where are you right now? I gave her the address of the rundown diner on the edge of my old neighborhood. She told me to stay exactly where I was and hung up before I could ask a single question. Harper Reed was a massive legend in the city. She was universally known as the corporate shark who destroyed massive hostile takeovers before breakfast and ruined corrupt executives for sport. I pulled my bleached jacket tightly around my shoulders and waited. Exactly 10 minutes later, a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb outside the diner. A tall, intimidating woman in an immaculate slate gray suit stepped out into the afternoon sun. She walked into the diner, scanning the shabby room until her sharp, predatory eyes locked directly onto me. She slid into the cracked vinyl booth opposite me and immediately opened a thin silver laptop. She did not offer a handshake or any empty pleasantries. Julian was a brilliantly cautious man, Harper said, her fingers flying rapidly across her keyboard. He knew Veronica was slowly killing him, and he knew he did not have the physical strength to fight her in open court. So he hired me to be the executioner when the time was right. He knew you would eventually find the hidden flash drive, Maya. He just needed you to grow up enough to survive the immense fallout. Harper pulled up a scanned legal document on her high-resolution screen. Dr. Grant just forwarded this directly to my secure server, she explained, turning the laptop slightly so I could see the digital pages. This is the emergency psychiatric evaluation Preston submitted to the judge an hour ago. Veronica completely forged the signatures of 2 separate state-appointed psychiatrists. The documents claim you suffer from severe violent schizophrenia and require immediate permanent institutionalization. They wrote down fabricated incidents of you attacking hospital staff and hallucinating. They are trying to legally strip you of your basic human rights so they can become your absolute legal guardians and bypass the biometric lock on your father's patent. I stared at the fake medical history, my stomach churning with absolute disgust. Veronica was willing to lock me in a padded room for the rest of my life just to secure her stolen wealth. I told Harper we had to leave right now to stop the judge from signing the injunction at the 5 o'clock hearing. Harper let out a harsh, humorless laugh that sent a chill down my spine. Veronica and Preston are not just incredibly greedy, Maya, she said, pulling up a completely different set of encrypted documents. They are dangerously stupid. I have been secretly tracking Preston's private finances for the last 3 years, just waiting for him to make a fatal mistake. He did not just want to sell your father's life work to buy a new luxury yacht. He is running for his actual life. She showed me a complex series of offshore bank statements and hidden ledger transfers. Preston has accumulated massive illegal gambling debts through unregulated offshore syndicates, Harper explained, her dark eyes tracing the staggering numbers on the screen. He owes very violent, dangerous people over $30 million. He secretly used the entire Jackson estate, the mansion, the liquid assets and the patent rights as collateral for those illegal loans. If he does not deliver that $100 million medical board payout today, the syndicates will take the house, and they will absolutely put a bullet in his head by midnight. The absolute desperation of their chaotic plan finally made total sense. They were not just trying to get rich, they were trying to survive the terrifying consequences of their own reckless greed. Veronica was actively willing to have me locked in a psychiatric ward and heavily medicated forever just to cover for a privileged finance bro who gambled away her stolen mansion. "We have the master codes now," I said, feeling a massive surge of pure adrenaline pumping through my veins. "We have the hidden video of my father confessing to the poisoning. We can take this evidence directly to the police right now and have them both arrested for murder and massive corporate fraud." "We will do exactly that," Harper said, snapping her silver laptop shut with a loud click. "We are going to the downtown courthouse right now to intercept the presiding judge before the 5 o'clock emergency hearing begins. We are going to bury Veronica and Preston so deep in a federal penitentiary they will never see daylight again." Suddenly, a loud, piercing alarm erupted from Harper's cell phone sitting on the table. The harsh, grating noise startled the few remaining customers in the diner, causing them to turn and stare. Harper snatched the phone off the Formica table and stared intently at the glowing screen. All the color instantly drained from her sharp, confident face. She looked up at me, and for the very first time I saw genuine, absolute panic flash in the corporate shark's eyes. "What is it?" I asked, my voice dropping to a terrified whisper. Harper swallowed hard, gripping the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Preston did not wait for the 5 o'clock hearing. She said, her voice dropping into a dead, horrifying silence. "He knew the hospital board directors were getting incredibly suspicious after your stunt in the main lobby. He panicked. He just paid off a corrupt county clerk to forge the judge's official signature on the psychiatric injunction early." I felt the room spin as I asked her what that actually meant for us. "It means you are legally incompetent." "As of 5 minutes ago," Harper said, her devastating words hitting me like a speeding freight train. "They successfully bypassed your biometric lock using their new guardianship status. The patent sale to the medical board was just fully authorized, and the $100 million is currently transferring into Preston's offshore account right now." Before I could even wrap my fingers around the hard object hidden inside the wet fabric, the heavy dining room doors swung violently open, hitting the wall with a loud crash. Preston marched into the room, flanked by two massive private security guards wearing dark, tailored suits. He was breathing heavily, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He must have rushed straight from the downtown courthouse the absolute second he heard I was crashing their little victory party. "What the hell is going on in here?" Preston demanded, his voice booming over the shocked whispers of the wealthy guests. He looked at the ruined hors d'oeuvres table, the shattered crystal, and the bleached jacket clutched tightly in my hands. His eyes narrowed with a dangerous, furious glint. "I told you to stay at the hospital, Maya. Harrison called me and said you made a massive scene there, too. You are completely out of control. You have lost your mind." I stood my ground, holding the damp, unraveled jacket tightly against my chest. "You do not own my father's legacy." "Preston," I said, my voice perfectly level, despite the hot adrenaline rushing through my veins. "You do not own me, and you are not going to sell his life work to the highest bidder just to fund your pathetic, shallow lifestyle." Preston sneered, stepping right into my personal space until I could smell his expensive cologne. He signaled the two massive security guards, who immediately flanked me, grabbing my arms with bruising, terrifying force. "You really think you can stop me?" Preston said, his voice dropping to a vicious, mocking whisper, meant only for me. "I own the judges in this city, Maya. I own the board directors. I own the lawyers. You are nothing but a broke black girl trying to steal my hard work. You have no money, no power, and absolutely no standing in this world. You are a miserable failure, just like Veronica always said. Throw her out of my house right now." The guards did not hesitate for a single second. They dragged me backward through the grand dining room, my boots sliding uselessly against the polished hardwood floors. We moved past the staring faces of the high society friends and wealthy investors who simply watched the spectacle in utter silence. Brianna took a slow sip of her champagne, looking mildly amused by the violence. Veronica crossed her arms over her emerald gown and smiled a cold, satisfied smile as I was violently pulled out of the room. The guards dragged me down the long, extravagant hallway and pushed open the heavy mahogany front doors. They did not just escort me out to the curb, they literally lifted me off my feet and shoved me hard down the steep stone steps. I stumbled wildly and fell hard onto the rough concrete driveway, scraping my knees and tearing the skin on my palms. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut behind me with a loud, definitive thud, locking me out of my own childhood home. I sat on the cold pavement, ignoring the stinging, burning pain in my knees and the blood trickling from my scraped hands. The afternoon sun had dipped far behind the tall oak trees, casting long gray shadows across the meticulously manicured lawn. I looked down at the ruined lab jacket still clutched tightly in my shaking hands. The industrial bleach had done more than just reveal the hidden golden crest. It had severely weakened the thick industrial thread my father had used to sew the inner structural lining. My fingers desperately found the hard rectangular lump again. I dug my broken nails into the frayed chemical-soaked seam and ripped the wet fabric completely open. Tucked deep inside a hidden waterproof pocket was a small silver flash drive. It was incredibly heavy and sleek, with a biometric thumbprint scanner built directly into the solid metal casing. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm in my chest as I stared at it. My father had literally carried the key to his entire empire close to his heart. He had specifically sewn it into the one ordinary item of clothing he knew Veronica would never care enough to check or keep. I vividly remembered a quiet, rainy night years ago when I was just a teenager. My father had been sitting alone in his dimly lit study with a needle and heavy nylon thread, working meticulously on the lining of this exact same jacket. He had looked up at me with exhausted, hollow eyes and told me that in the ruthless corporate world, you could never truly trust anyone, not even the people sleeping under your own roof. He said that a brilliant scientist always keeps a backup plan secretly sewn into the very seams of his life. I had thought he was just being paranoid from working too many late nights, but he had actually been preparing for this exact terrifying moment. He knew Veronica and Preston were circling him like hungry vultures, and he had left me the ultimate weapon to fight back. I scrambled to my feet, clutching the silver drive so tightly its edges dug into my palm. I needed a secure computer immediately. I ran down the long, winding driveway, leaving the massive estate and my cruel stepmother behind. My legs ached, and my lungs burned, but I did not stop running until I reached a small, run-down diner, sitting on the very edge of the wealthy neighborhood. The cracked neon sign buzzed loudly above the dirty glass door. I pushed my way inside. The diner was nearly empty, smelling heavily of stale black coffee and old fried food. I slid into a sticky corner booth facing the front door and pulled my old battered laptop from my canvas bag. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open the screen. The tired diner waitress came over and dropped a chipped coffee mug on the table, but I did not even acknowledge her presence. I pressed my right thumb firmly against the small glass scanner on the silver drive. A tiny green light flashed instantly, recognizing my unique biological signature. I plugged the drive into the side port of my laptop. The screen went completely black for a terrifying, agonizing second. Then a heavily encrypted file system suddenly popped up, completely bypassing all of my normal computer security protocols and firewalls. A single video file sat perfectly centered on the dark screen. It was simply titled for Maya. I clicked it. The screen flickered with static for a moment, and then my father's face appeared. He looked so incredibly sick and tired. His skin was a pale, sickly gray, and dark bruised circles hung heavily under his sunken eyes. He was sitting in his private basement laboratory, wearing the exact same white jacket I was currently holding in my lap. Seeing him alive and speaking even just on a recorded screen made my throat tighten with a fresh, overwhelming wave of grief. Maya, my beautiful, brilliant girl. My father said, his voice raspy, dry, and weak. If you are watching this video, it means I am gone, and you have finally found the hidden drive. I am so sorry I had to leave you alone like this. I am so deeply sorry I could not protect you from them while I was still alive. I have to speak quickly and clearly, because my time is rapidly running out. He leaned closer to the camera lens, his eyes filled with a desperate, terrifying urgency. Veronica is poisoning me, Maya, he said, the horrible words hitting me like a physical blow to the chest. She thinks I do not know, but I have been secretly running my own comprehensive blood panels in the lab late at night. She has been slowly slipping a highly sophisticated synthetic neurotoxin into my meals over the last few months. She and Preston are actively trying to accelerate my death so they can illegally seize total control of Jackson Medical Innovations before I can finalize the new legal trust protecting you. I cannot go to the police because Preston has already paid off the chief medical investigator, and I simply do not have enough physical strength left in my failing body to fight them in open court. Hot, angry tears streamed down my face, completely blurring the computer screen. My brilliant father had known he was being slowly murdered in his own home, and he had spent his agonizing final days quietly trying to protect me. I could not let them steal my life work, Maya. My father continued, his voice breaking slightly with emotion. The cellular filter technology is meant to heal ordinary people, not to be sold off as a luxury vanity project for the global elite. I baked an undetectable poison pill into the core source code, but I also securely locked the master override files right here on this physical drive. Below this video, you will find the complete master codes, the original patent blueprints, and the unedited chemical analysis of my poisoned blood, proving exactly what Veronica did to me. The video ended abruptly, freezing on my father's weary but fiercely determined face. I sat alone in the quiet diner booth, completely paralyzed by the sheer horror of what I had just heard. Veronica had murdered my father for his money, and Preston had actively helped her cover it up with his dirty connections. They had treated me like disposable garbage, while comfortably living in a mansion paid for by a man they intentionally killed. Suddenly, a loud mechanical chime echoed sharply from my laptop speakers, breaking the terrible silence. A bright red progress bar unexpectedly appeared at the very bottom of the screen. I watched in total shock as a system notification flashed across the display, stating that the drive was automatically pinging a secure external server. The biometric lock had automatically triggered a massive upload sequence broadcasting the truth to an unknown recipient. The red progress bar slowly filled the bottom of the laptop screen, completing the automatic upload sequence with a sharp electronic chime. The heavily encrypted files containing my father's undeniable murder confession and the original patent blueprints vanished into a secure external server, leaving me sitting alone in the greasy diner booth. The long, exhausting night finally gave way to a cold, gray morning, but I did not sleep for a single second. The stolen $100 million was already sitting in Preston's offshore accounts, but Harper Reed had assured me that their arrogant victory would be incredibly short-lived. I just needed to strike them exactly where it hurt the most to watch their entire empire crumble. The very next day, Brianna hosted a ridiculously lavish launch party for her brand new fake wellness company. She had shamelessly used a massive portion of my father's stolen legacy to fund the entire extravagant event. The party was held in an exclusive downtown penthouse overlooking the entire city skyline. Massive ice sculptures carved into the shape of delicate lotus flowers dominated the center of the expansive room, melting slowly under the warm, ambient lighting. Waiters carried heavy silver trays piled high with rare vintage champagne that cost thousands of dollars a single bottle, and delicate imported delicacies that most people would never see in a lifetime. The sheer level of extravagant, chaotic spending was absolutely nauseating, considering every single cent was paid for with my father's blood. Getting inside the heavily guarded penthouse was surprisingly easy. The massive private security teams were entirely focused on looking for angry corporate competitors or desperate paparazzi, not the invisible working-class people serving their food. I simply tied my dark hair back, slipped on a generic black catering uniform I bought down the street, and confidently walked right through the loading dock. I slipped through the service entrance, posing perfectly as a temporary caterer hired for the busy afternoon shift. I blended seamlessly into the background, holding a silver tray of expensive caviar appetizers. I navigated slowly through the dense, suffocating crowd of wealthy socialites and arrogant lifestyle influencers. Brianna was standing near a massive tropical floral arrangement, wearing a custom designer silk gown that shimmered brightly under the heavy chandelier lights. She was laughing loudly, tossing her blonde hair back, and aggressively soaking up the desperate admiration of everyone around her. She had absolutely no idea that her entire fake corporate empire was standing on the very edge of a massive federal cliff. I kept my head down, strictly avoiding Veronica, who was busy holding court on the far side of the penthouse. My eyes scanned the crowded room until I found my exact targets. Brianna's primary financial investors were huddled tightly together near the gleaming marble bar, discussing their future profit margins and massive return projections. They were three wealthy, arrogant venture capitalists who had blindly thrown their millions behind Brianna's completely fake wellness brand, hoping to quickly cash in on the respected Jackson family name before anyone realized she had absolutely no scientific background. I adjusted the heavy silver tray in my hands and walked smoothly toward their exclusive group. I offered them the expensive caviar with a polite, generic smile, patiently waiting until they each took a small linen napkin before leaning in close. I kept my voice incredibly low and casually whispered a single devastating sentence. I told them they might want to check the financial news immediately because the Securities and Exchange Commission was currently raiding Preston's downtown corporate office and actively seizing all associated assets. The three wealthy investors completely froze. Their smug, confident expressions instantly vanished, replaced by raw, sheer, unadulterated panic. I offered a polite, deferential nod and quickly slipped away, melting back into the anonymous catering staff. From across the massive room, I watched the absolute chaotic fallout unfold. The wealthy investors immediately pulled out their expensive cell phones, frantically scrolling through live news feeds and making desperate emergency calls to their high-powered legal teams. Within seconds, they marched directly across the penthouse and aggressively cornered Brianna. They angrily demanded immediate answers about their vulnerable investments, their furious voices rising sharply above the gentle classical music playing in the background. Brianna's fake confident smile completely shattered into a million pieces. She looked around the luxurious room with wide, terrified eyes, suddenly realizing that her entire perfect world was collapsing in real time. She shoved her way past the angry investors and practically sprinted down the long carpeted hallway away from the main party. She was breathing heavily, clutching her phone like a physical lifeline. I quickly abandoned my silver tray on a passing service cart and silently followed her down the hall. She shoved open the heavy oak door to a secluded private study and slammed it shut, locking the deadbolt from the inside. I did not even try the brass handle. I knew the exact architectural layout of these luxury penthouses. I slipped into the adjacent narrow service hallway used by the maintenance staff and quietly crept toward the shared ventilation shaft. I pressed my ear against the cold metal grate of the air vent and held my breath, listening intently to the chaos unfolding on the other side of the wall. Inside the quiet study, Brianna was pacing frantically across the hardwood floor. I heard the loud electronic beep of her phone connecting as she put the urgent call on speakerphone so she could pace the room. Preston answered almost immediately, and the sheer absolute terror in his voice echoed clearly through the metal air vent. "Preston, what the hell is going on?" Brianna demanded, her voice trembling with rising hysteria. "The investors are screaming about a massive federal raid. Tell me this is a lie, Preston. Tell me they are wrong." I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and hit the bright red record button, pressing the sensitive microphone directly against the cold metal grate. Preston was hyperventilating wildly on the other end of the line, his breath catching in ragged, chaotic gasps that sounded like a dying animal. "It is all gone, Brianna," Preston screamed, his voice cracking with absolute unfiltered panic. "The feds just kicked the heavy glass doors in. They have absolutely everything. They have the fake psychiatric evaluations and the hidden bank ledgers. I had to forge the signature, Brianna. Veronica made me do it to get the money transferred faster so we could pay off the violent syndicate. If the feds find the offshore Cayman accounts, we are all going to federal prison for the rest of our natural lives." Brianna let out a loud, pathetic sob, collapsing heavily against the solid wooden desk in the study. "You promised me we were safe," she cried, her voice echoing miserably through the metal vent. "You promised me Maya was locked out forever and we had won." "Maya is the one who tipped them off," Preston yelled, the sound of approaching police sirens suddenly blaring loudly in the background of his frantic call. "They are tearing the entire corporate office apart right now. You need to get out of there, Brianna. You need to run immediately before they completely freeze your accounts too." I watched the digital recording timer on my bright phone screen capture every single incriminating second of their desperate, terrified conversation. The high-definition audio was completely flawless, capturing Preston's direct, explicit confession to the legal forgery and the illegal Cayman accounts. I slowly stopped the recording and saved the critical audio file securely to multiple encrypted cloud servers, ensuring it could never be deleted or destroyed. I stepped back from the dusty air vent, a deep, profound sense of pure poetic justice settling warmly over my heavy chest. The stolen $100 million had bought them exactly 24 hours of fake, glamorous happiness, but it was ultimately going to buy them a miserable, violent lifetime behind cold steel bars. I turned around and walked quietly down the dim service hallway, leaving Brianna weeping violently alone in the dark study, while her lavish fake launch party raged on, completely oblivious to the absolute destruction heading their way. I walked quietly down the dim service hallway, my heart still pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The heavy oak door of the private study remained firmly shut behind me, trapping Brianna in her own miserable world of panic and impending ruin. I clutched my cell phone tightly in my sweaty palm, feeling the smooth metal casing pressing against my skin. The high-definition audio file containing Preston's desperate confession was already safely locked away in 3 separate encrypted cloud servers. There was absolutely nothing they could do to delete it or destroy the evidence now. I took a deep breath, letting the cool, filtered air of the maintenance corridor fill my lungs. I just needed to slip back out through the main penthouse and disappear into the busy downtown streets. My part in this specific operation was entirely finished, and Harper Reed was already setting the final legal traps in motion. I pushed open the discreet swinging door at the end of the hall and stepped back into the blinding light of the lavish launch party. The contrast was completely jarring. The loud thumping bass of the expensive sound system vibrated through the polished hardwood floors. Wealthy socialites and arrogant influencers were still completely oblivious to the massive federal raid happening just a few miles away. They continued to laugh loudly and sip their vintage champagne, completely unaware that the fake wellness empire they were celebrating was actively crumbling into dust. The massive ice sculptures carved into delicate lotus flowers were beginning to melt, leaving small pools of water on the elegant glass tables. I kept my head down, pulling the collar of my cheap black catering uniform up slightly. I grabbed an empty silver tray from a passing waiter just to blend in and started walking slowly toward the heavy glass exit doors. I was less than 20 feet away from the private elevator bank when a sharp manicured hand clamped down viciously on my upper arm. The long acrylic nails dug painfully through the thin fabric of my uniform. I froze instantly. The grip was painfully familiar. I slowly turned my head and found myself staring directly into the cold, furious eyes of Veronica. She was wearing a stunning, floor-length emerald gown that clung perfectly to her tall frame. Heavy diamond earrings sparkled aggressively under the bright chandelier lights, but her face was twisted into a mask of pure aristocratic disgust. She looked me up and down, taking in my messy dark hair and the cheap, stained catering uniform I was wearing. A cruel, condescending smile slowly spread across her perfectly painted lips. "What an absolutely pathetic sight," Veronica sneered, her voice dripping with pure venom. "I always knew you would eventually end up serving drinks to people who actually matter, Maya. It is exactly where a talentless, ungrateful brat like you belongs." I tried to yank my arm away, but her grip only tightened painfully. She roughly pulled me out of the main traffic of the party, dragging me behind a massive wall of imported tropical flowers that completely shielded us from the oblivious wealthy guests. The heavy scent of orchids and expensive perfume was utterly suffocating. "Let go of me, Veronica," I said, my voice perfectly steady and calm. "You have absolutely no right to touch me." "I have every right," Veronica hissed, stepping so incredibly close to me that I could feel her angry breath on my face. "You are a legally incompetent child now, Maya. Preston and I own your entire miserable life. I heard about your little stunt whispering desperate lies to Brianna's investors earlier. You really thought you could come in here dressed like a common servant and ruin our massive launch party with your pathetic, desperate rumors. You are making a massive fool of yourself. I held her dark, furious gaze, refusing to look away or show a single ounce of the fear she so desperately wanted to see. They are not rumors, Veronica, I said quietly, letting the absolute truth hang heavily between us. Veronica let out a harsh, mocking laugh, tossing her elegant head back. You really do not know when to quit, do you? She said, reaching into her glittering designer clutch. You think you can just keep showing up and being a massive, annoying thorn in my side? You think you are so incredibly righteous trying to defend a dead man who is too weak to even protect himself? Well, I am permanently ending this exhausting little game tonight, Maya. I am going to make absolutely certain that you never show your face in our world ever again. She pulled a sleek gold smartphone from her clutch and tapped the bright screen a few times. She forcefully shoved the phone right into my face, forcing me to look at the bright display. A high-definition video was playing silently on the screen. My stomach turned over violently as I watched. It was incredibly realistic, deep-fake footage of me. The digital rendering was completely flawless, perfectly copying my face, my exact mannerisms, and my posture. In the highly convincing video, my digital duplicate was standing in a hospital supply room, actively stealing heavily restricted narcotics and altering secure patient medical records. It looked entirely real down to the exact lighting and the hospital uniform I was wearing. Veronica watched my face closely, her eyes shining with malicious absolute triumph. It cost me a staggering amount of money to have this little masterpiece created, she whispered, her tone incredibly dark and threatening. The artificial intelligence they use these days is utterly terrifying, is it not? The metadata is completely scrubbed and the timestamps are perfectly aligned with your actual hospital shifts. If I send this highly incriminating file to the state medical board tonight, your entire career in medicine is permanently over before it even begins. She stepped even closer, cornering me against the large glass window overlooking the sprawling city skyline. You will never be a doctor, Maya Veronica continued, her voice dropping to a vicious, dangerous register. No hospital in the entire country will ever hire a disgraced thief. You will spend the rest of your miserable, pathetic life completely ruined. All you have to do to stop me from hitting send is walk out of those elevator doors right now, sign away any remaining legal claim you think you have to the estate, and disappear completely. I stared at the fake video playing on an endless, continuous loop. The sheer absolute cruelty of her extortion plan was staggering. She was actively willing to destroy my entire future just to ensure her stolen comfort. She truly believed she had me completely cornered and completely defeated. You are just like your father. Smart but easily crushed, Veronica sneered, delivering the ultimate deeply personal blow. Julian thought he could outsmart me too. He thought his little hidden codes and secret blood tests would save him. But in the end, he died completely alone, perfectly aware that I had beaten him. And now you are going to fade away, exactly like he did. She waited eagerly for me to break down. She wanted the tears, the begging, the total absolute surrender. She wanted to watch me completely shatter into a million broken pieces right in front of her. Instead, I let out a long, slow breath and smiled. It was not a forced smile or a defensive smirk. It was a wide, genuine smile of pure, absolute victory. The corporate shark Harper Reed had not just been sitting idle while I was recording Brianna's desperate confession. She had been actively executing the most aggressive financial maneuver of her entire legendary career. I do not care about your fake video, Veronica, I said, my voice ringing with absolute crystal-clear certainty. You can send it to the medical board. You can send it to the local news. You can send it to the mayor for all I care. None of it is going to matter in exactly 5 seconds. Veronica's cruel, triumphant smile faltered slightly. Her dark eyes narrowed with sudden, deep suspicion. What are you talking about, you crazy little brat? She demanded, gripping her gold phone tightly. I reached out and gently pushed her hand holding the deepfake video away from my face. Check your bank app. Veronica, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, terrifying whisper. Check the joint offshore Cayman account where Preston transferred the medical board payout. Veronica glared at me, her chest heaving with sudden unexplainable anxiety. You are completely bluffing, she hissed, but her manicured fingers were already moving frantically across the smooth glass screen. She closed the fake video and rapidly opened her heavily encrypted international banking application. The bright white screen loaded, requiring her facial recognition to open the primary dashboard. I watched the exact second her entire luxurious world violently ended. Veronica's eyes went incredibly wide, stretching so far they looked like they might actually tear. Her jaw dropped open in a silent, horrifying scream. All the expensive makeup in the world could not hide the sudden sickly gray pallor that completely drained the color from her flawless face. The gold phone began to shake violently in her trembling hands. The $100 million transfer was completely gone. The massive life-changing balance that was supposed to secure her elite future forever simply did not exist anymore. The bright digital numbers on the glowing screen stared back at her in total, absolute silence. The balance read $0.00. Veronica stood completely paralyzed, staring at the bright digital screen of her gold phone. Her thumb aggressively tapped the refresh icon over and over again, but the glowing zero remained unchanged. The absolute silence between us was heavy and suffocating, broken only by the distant muffled bass of the launch party raging just outside the hallway. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a dry, pathetic gasping sound came out. Her perfect, aristocratic composure had completely evaporated, leaving behind nothing but raw, terrifying panic. She looked like a fragile porcelain doll that had just been dropped on a concrete floor. Before she could even process the absolute destruction of her financial empire, the heavy wooden doors at the end of the private corridor flew open with a violent crash. Preston barged into the secluded space, breathing heavily and sweating profusely through his custom-tailored silk suit. His designer tie was pulled loose, and his normally perfectly styled hair was a disheveled mess. He looked like a wild, cornered animal, frantically searching for a way out of a burning building. He completely ignored my presence, storming directly toward Veronica, with his own cell phone clutched desperately in his shaking hands. "Veronica," he gasped, his voice cracking with sheer hysteria. "The Cayman accounts. They are completely drained. Everything is frozen. The bank managers are not answering my calls, and the online portals are locked out. They will not even let me log into the basic dashboard to view the transaction history." Veronica slowly raised her head, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at me. "She did it, Preston," she whispered, her voice barely audible over her own rapid breathing. "The broke little brat did something to the money. She somehow hacked into our offshore trusts." Preston finally turned to look at me, his blue eyes widening with a mixture of shock and rapidly building fury. He stepped toward me, his chest heaving aggressively. "What did you do, Maya?" he demanded, pointing his phone at my face like a weapon. "Where the hell is my $100 million? You better tell me right now, or I swear I will ruin you." I crossed my arms over my cheap catering uniform, feeling a deep, incredible sense of peace wash over my entire body. "Your $100 million never existed, Preston," I said, my voice perfectly calm and steady. "That money belonged to Jackson Medical Innovations, and it belonged to my father. You thought you could just forge his signature and quietly sweep his entire life work into an untraceable offshore account. You thought you were completely untouchable because you were born with wealth and privilege." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, refusing to be intimidated by his looming physical presence. But my father was a brilliant man. I continued watching the color drain from Preston's sweating face. He knew exactly what you and Veronica were planning behind his back. He built a biometric poison pill directly into the core source code of his cellular filter technology. The second I plugged that hidden flash drive into my computer, it automatically alerted my corporate attorney, Harper Reed. She immediately filed a massive federal injunction using the unique access codes my father left specifically for me. Preston's jaw dropped open in absolute horror as the realization finally hit him. "Harper Reed? I explained clearly and slowly had the federal banking authorities execute an immediate digital clawback. They tracked your illegal wire transfers straight through your little shell companies and froze every single asset connected to your names. They yanked the funds right out of your offshore accounts while you were out there drinking vintage champagne and celebrating your fake victory. You do not have a dime left, Preston. The money is already sitting safely in a secure federal holding trust awaiting the massive criminal investigation that is coming for both of you. Preston stumbled backward, hitting the glass window behind him. He looked like the ground had literally dropped out from beneath his expensive leather shoes. His absolute white privilege, his arrogant certainty that he could just steal whatever he wanted without any consequences was shattering into a million sharp pieces right in front of my eyes. He had never faced a single real consequence in his entire pampered life, and the sheer weight of his impending ruin was crushing his chest. Suddenly, his cell phone began to vibrate violently in his hand. The loud, aggressive buzzing sound filled the tense, quiet space. Preston looked down at the caller ID, and his entire body flinched as if he had been physically struck. He stared at the glowing screen with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. His breathing hitched in his throat. "They are calling me," he whispered, his voice trembling so badly he could barely form the words. "They know the money is gone." "Who is calling you?" Veronica demanded, stepping forward and grabbing his arm. "Preston, who is on the phone?" Preston swallowed hard, sweat dripping down his pale forehead. "The private lenders, Veronica," he confessed, his voice dropping to a panicked, desperate whisper. "The people who bridged the massive gap for our shell companies before the medical board payout cleared. They are not the kind of people who patiently wait for bank errors to be resolved. They are incredibly violent, dangerous people who operate strictly in the shadows." Veronica gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "You told me you paid them off," she hissed, her eyes darting frantically toward the door. "You told me the syndicate was completely handled yesterday afternoon. I did pay them." Preston yelled, his panic finally boiling over into frantic defensive anger. "The transfer was pending clearance this morning, but now the accounts are frozen and the massive payment bounced back. And it gets worse, Veronica. It gets so much worse." He ran a shaking hand through his messy hair, looking frantically around the small, enclosed space, as if searching for a magical escape route. "I just bought the Ocean Serenity," he blurted out, the confession tumbling from his lips in a rush of pure terror. "The $5 million luxury yacht we looked at last month. I literally signed the final purchase agreement exactly 1 hour ago to celebrate the launch party. I put down a massive non-refundable deposit using a new line of credit directly leveraged against the Cayman Trust. The yacht brokers just got the notification that my accounts are completely locked." Veronica stared at him in absolute disgusted disbelief. "You bought a $5 million boat on credit while we were waiting for stolen funds to clear, you absolute idiot," she screamed, hitting his chest with her fists. "You doomed us both out of pure greed." "I was celebrating," Preston screamed back, pushing her away roughly. "We had the 100 million, Veronica. We were kings of this city, and now I am completely bankrupt. I am worse than bankrupt. I owe millions of dollars to ruthless men who will literally break my legs and throw me in the river if I do not wire them their money by midnight tonight." He turned back to me, his breathing ragged and shallow. The sheer terror in his eyes was slowly morphing into something much darker and far more dangerous. His lifelong entitlement, his arrogant belief that he could simply intimidate and control every single person in his orbit, twisted into a violent, blind rage. The reality that a young black woman in a cheap catering uniform had completely outsmarted him and destroyed his entire fraudulent empire was finally settling into his privileged brain, and it was driving him absolutely insane. He shoved his phone deep into his pocket and slowly walked past me, his heavy footsteps thudding loudly against the floor. He marched directly to the heavy wooden double doors that led back out to the main penthouse hallway. He grabbed the thick brass handles and pulled the heavy doors firmly shut. The loud metallic click of the solid steel deadbolt sliding into place echoed through the quiet room like a gunshot. I took a cautious step backward, my heart suddenly hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Veronica stopped yelling and turned to watch him, her own eyes widening with fresh alarm as she realized exactly what he was doing. Preston turned around to face us, his back pressed firmly against the locked doors to ensure no one could enter or exit the room. His face was twisted into a dark, ugly mask of pure, desperate violence. The polished corporate executive was completely gone, replaced by a cornered, ruthless criminal who had absolutely nothing left to lose. He glared at me, his chest heaving as he pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are going to fix this right now," Preston growled, his voice dropping to a low, terrifying register that sent a cold chill straight down my spine. "You are going to call that corporate lawyer of yours, and you are going to give her the exact biometric codes she needs to reverse the federal injunction. Nobody is leaving until you transfer that money back to me, Maya." Preston stood blocking the heavy mahogany doors, his chest heaving with violent, frantic breaths. He demanded that I call Harper Reed and reverse the federal injunction immediately. The air in the private study felt thick and suffocating, but I forced my heart rate to slow down. My father had taught me to always look for the structural weakness in any high-pressure situation, and Preston's structural weakness was his complete lack of emotional control. I took a slow, calculated step backward, putting a few feet of distance between his shaking fists and my face. I told him fine, keeping my voice low and soothing, like I was talking to a cornered animal. I said I would call my lawyer and authorize the transfer, but he just needed to stay right there. I lifted my cell phone, pretending to dial the number while my eyes darted quickly around the dark wood-paneled walls until I spotted exactly what I needed. Right next to the heavy velvet curtains, a bright red fire alarm pull station sat flush against the expensive wallpaper. I just needed to distract him for 2 more seconds. I lowered my phone and looked him dead in the eyes, telling him he had to promise me that Veronica would get absolutely nothing. Preston paused, his greedy mind instantly catching on the idea of keeping the entire stolen $100 million entirely for himself. In that single split second of selfish hesitation, I lunged backward. I slammed my elbow violently into the glass casing of the fire alarm and pulled the white lever straight down with all my strength. A deafening electronic siren instantly ripped through the quiet study. The noise was so incredibly loud and piercing that Preston instinctively dropped his phone and covered his ears with both hands. A fraction of a second later, the emergency overhead sprinkler system activated. Freezing cold, rusty water sprayed violently down from the high ceiling, completely soaking Preston's expensive custom silk suit and ruining Veronica's perfectly styled hair. Preston screamed a string of violent curses, slipping blindly on the wet hardwood floor as he tried to grab me. But I was already moving. I shoved hard past him, my wet catering uniform sticking to my skin as I grabbed the brass deadbolt and unlocked the heavy doors. I burst out into the main penthouse hallway, running straight into a massive wave of pure chaos. The lavish launch party had completely devolved into a terrified stampede of wealthy socialites desperately trying to escape the freezing indoor rain. The massive ice sculptures were melting rapidly into the soaked carpets, and the expensive vintage champagne was abandoned on overturned silver trays. I did not look back. I slipped right through the panicked, screaming crowd, blending perfectly into the confusion, until I reached the emergency stairwell. I ran down 6 flights of stairs and pushed out into the cool, dark evening air of the city, leaving Preston and Veronica to face their absolute financial ruin completely alone. 3 incredibly long days passed in a blur of intense legal strategy and quiet vindication. The federal authorities were meticulously combing through the seized hard drives from the downtown corporate office, unraveling years of Veronica and Preston's financial fraud. But despite being utterly bankrupt and heavily investigated, Preston refused to quietly disappear. He was running purely on toxic fumes and massive lines of secret credit, desperately trying to maintain the polished illusion that he was still a legitimate billionaire. On a crisp Friday evening, the hospital board hosted its prestigious annual medical gala at the Grand Plaza Hotel. This was the absolute peak of high society networking, where elite surgeons, wealthy hospital administrators, and massive pharmaceutical donors gathered to secure funding and finalize massive hospital contracts. Preston had previously pledged a massive illegal donation to buy his way into the platinum donor circle. He desperately needed the hospital board to officially approve the purchase of my father's company so he could legally sell off the stolen cellular filter technology and pay back his violent loan sharks. I arrived at the Grand Plaza Hotel wearing a stunning floor-length midnight blue gown that Harper Reed had insisted on buying for me. I walked past the flashing cameras of the local medical press, feeling a deep, calm certainty radiating through my entire body. My father had spent his entire life building his brilliant reputation in these very same ballrooms, and tonight, I was going to officially reclaim his legacy. I stepped into the massive, glittering ballroom, and the sheer scale of the event took my breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden light over dozens of round tables covered in white silk and enormous floral centerpieces. I scanned the crowded room until I spotted him. Preston was standing near the front of the stage wearing a sharply tailored black tuxedo, but he looked absolutely terrible. His face was flushed a dark, angry red, and he was drinking heavily from a crystal tumbler. He was cornering several uncomfortable-looking hospital executives, laughing too loudly and sweating profusely. He was desperately trying to act like a powerful corporate titan, but the sheer terror of his impending criminal charges was practically radiating off his shaking hands. I walked slowly through the crowd, exchanging warm, polite greetings with several of my former medical school professors. As I moved closer to the main stage, Preston's bloodshot eyes suddenly locked directly onto me. His fake, confident smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of pure, unhinged malice. His fragile white privilege simply could not process the sight of me standing proudly in his elite, exclusive space. He could not handle the fact that I was no longer a frightened, grieving daughter, but a powerful force completely untouchable and unafraid. He slammed his half-empty glass down on a passing waiter's tray and shoved his way aggressively through the crowd of wealthy doctors. Before anyone could stop him, he marched directly up the carpeted stairs and stormed onto the main stage. He roughly pushed the hospital administrator aside and grabbed the heavy microphone off the podium. The feedback shrieked loudly through the massive speakers, causing the entire ballroom to fall into a sudden, shocked silence. Hundreds of elite medical professionals turned their attention to the stage, watching in utter confusion as Preston gripped the microphone stand with white knuckles. "Ladies and gentlemen," Preston shouted, his voice echoing violently across the quiet ballroom. His speech was slightly slurred, but his malicious intent was perfectly clear. He said he apologized for the interruption, but there was a massive security issue they needed to address immediately. He told the crowd they had a highly dangerous fraud standing right there in their prestigious room tonight. He pointed a shaking finger directly at me as I stood calmly near the center aisle. Everyone turned to stare at me, but I kept my chin high, holding my ground without a single flinch. "That woman right there is Maya Jackson," Preston sneered, his voice dripping with pure toxic hatred. He told them I was nothing but a fraudulent student who failed out of my basic clinical rotations. He claimed I was deeply unstable and actively trying to steal a legitimate multi-million-dollar medical company through ridiculous fabricated legal injunctions. He shouted that I did not belong in medical school and did not belong in their elite ballroom, and certainly did not belong in the professional medical community. He called me a desperate broke criminal who needed to be thrown out by security immediately before I compromised the integrity of the entire hospital board. The crowd murmured in quiet shock, exchanging uncomfortable glances. Preston stood on the stage, breathing heavily, looking incredibly smug as he waited for the security guards to grab me. He truly believed his public performance had successfully ruined my reputation forever. But before anyone could move, a tall, distinguished man with silver hair walked purposefully out from behind the heavy stage curtains. It was Dr. Harrison Grant, the highly respected chief director of the medical board and my father's oldest friend. The entire room went completely silent out of sheer respect as he approached the podium. He looked at Preston with absolute professional disgust and firmly pulled the microphone out of his sweaty, shaking hand. "Actually, Preston," Dr. Grant said, his deep, steady voice ringing out with absolute total authority. "The hospital board held an emergency meeting this morning, and we have officially decided to completely reject your proposed sale. We are permanently severing all ties with your fraudulent shell company." He turned his warm, proud gaze directly toward me, cutting through the tension in the room like a brilliant ray of sunlight. "We are instead partnering directly with the brilliant mind who actually possesses the original patents and the true legal owner of Jackson Medical Innovations." Dr. Grant smiled warmly, raising his hand toward me. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the future of our medical community, Maya Jackson." The entire ballroom went dead silent as hundreds of wealthy guests, doctors, and hospital board members turned their heads to stare directly at me. Preston stood on the brightly lit stage, his face twisting from a smug, arrogant smirk into a mask of pure, unbridled rage as the microphone's feedback shrieked through the speakers. He completely lost his mind, his hands trembling violently as he clutched the microphone tightly, his knuckles turning a ghostly white color. "You cannot do this, Harrison!" he screamed, his voice cracking with a terrifying, desperate pitch that echoed off the high crystal ceilings. "This is my company now. Veronica and I bought it fair and square, and you are going to ruin a multi-million-dollar merger over a broke, insignificant girl who does not even belong in this room." The wealthy donors and board members began to murmur uncomfortably, looking away from the stage as Preston continued to unravel right in front of them. His eyes were wild and bloodshot, rolling back in his head as the sheer weight of his impending financial ruin completely crushed his mind. He knew his loan sharks were waiting in the shadows outside, and he knew his luxury lifestyle was evaporating into thin air with every passing second. His sophisticated corporate facade completely shattered, revealing the ugly, violent criminal underneath. He began screaming vile, disgusting racial slurs directly at me, his voice echoing loudly through the Grand Plaza Hotel banquet hall. "You are nothing but a thief, Maya!" he yelled, spit flying from his mouth into the bright stage lights. "Your father was weak, and you are just a worthless street girl trying to steal what belongs to elite people like us. You do not have the right to look me in the eye or breathe the same air as the people in this room." The sheer hatred in his voice sent a cold shockwave through the entire crowd. But I stood perfectly still in the center aisle, my arms crossed and my chin held high. I did not blink, and I did not show a single ounce of fear, because I knew his desperate insults were just the pathetic whimpers of a dying animal. Preston saw my calm, confident smile, and it drove him into a blind, absolute madness. He suddenly threw the microphone down onto the floor, causing a deafening boom to blast through the sound system, and lunged directly at me from the stage. His fingers were clawed like a wild animal trying to physically rip me apart before I could take another breath. But he did not even make it down the carpeted stairs. 3 massive security guards in dark suits moved with lightning speed, intercepting him mid-stride and violently tackling him directly to the polished floor. The heavy impact echoed sharply through the quiet room as they slammed his body down, pinning his arms behind his back and forcing his face against the expensive hardwood. Preston thrashed wildly, screaming and kicking his legs, but the guards held him down with crushing, immovable force. "Your white privilege cannot save you now, Preston," I said quietly, my voice carrying perfectly across the silent room. "You have no power here," Maya Preston yelled from the floor, his voice muffled against the wood as his expensive tuxedo tore under the weight of the guards holding him down. "You think this changes anything? You think a few board members can stop me? My father built this city, and my lawyers will have me out of any cell before midnight. You are still nothing, and you will never see a single dime of that money. I will burn this entire city to the ground before I let a nobody like you take what is mine. Veronica and I will destroy you. Maya, do you hear me?" We will destroy you. As his desperate, empty threats filled the air, the heavy brass doors at the back of the banquet hall suddenly swung open with a massive echo that caught the attention of everyone in the room. The entire crowd turned around, expecting to see the local city police officers Preston had paid off for years. But it was not the local police. A full tactical squad of federal agents strode purposefully into the ballroom, wearing dark blue jackets with the bright yellow letters FBI printed boldly across their backs. The guests gasped, drawing back in terror as the agents fanned out across the room, completely securing every exit. Walking right in front of the federal agents was my corporate attorney, Harper Reed. She looked absolutely immaculate in a sharp, tailored charcoal suit, her silver hair caught in a tight professional bun, and her expression cold and unreadable. She was holding a sleek black tablet displaying a live federal warrant. Harper walked directly up the center aisle, her expensive heels clicking rhythmically against the floor, matching the exact beat of my racing heart. She stood right over Preston, who was still pinned miserably to the ground by the security guards. Preston Blackwood. You are under federal arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and the premeditated theft of medical intellectual property. Harper announced, her clear, steady voice echoing over the building alarms. She tapped the screen of her tablet, and a familiar audio recording began to play loudly through the ballroom sound system. It was the exact conversation I had secretly recorded through the air vent at the launch party. Preston's own, panicked voice blasted through the speakers, admitting to forging my father's signature and hiding the stolen $100 million in offshore Cayman accounts to evade the feds. The wealthy investors and hospital board members gasped in absolute horror as Preston's own words stripped away his final layer of deception. Veronica stood frozen near the back of the room, her face ashen and her phone slipping from her hands, smashing against the floor. She realized in that exact second that the tape was ironclad and their entire fraudulent empire was permanently finished. The federal agent stepped forward, unlocking Preston's wrists from the guards and slapping heavy steel handcuffs over his suit's cuffs. They roughly lifted him from the floor, his face bruised and covered in sweat, his eyes hollow with the sudden, terrifying realization that he was going to a federal prison for the rest of his natural life. As they dragged him out of the Grand Plaza Hotel, past the silent, staring faces of his former peers, I turned back toward the main stage where Dr. Grant was waiting for me with a proud, knowing smile. My father's legacy was finally clean, and my sweet revenge was officially complete. The heavy steel doors of the Grand Plaza ballroom slowly swung shut behind the federal agents as they dragged Preston out into the hallway, his desperate screaming fading away into the distance. Inside the massive banquet hall, the absolute silence was deafening. Hundreds of elite doctors, wealthy investors, and hospital board members stood completely frozen, staring at the empty space where Preston had just been standing. The shocking audio recording of his confession was still echoing in their minds. Harper Reed stood perfectly still on the main stage, her sleek black tablet held firmly in her hands, her cold, calculating eyes scanning the room until they landed directly on Veronica. Veronica was backed against a massive floral arrangement, her flawless emerald gown blending into the green leaves. Her face was completely drained of color, looking like chalk under the bright crystal chandeliers. Her chest heaving rapidly as she stared at the shattered remains of her gold cell phone on the polished hardwood floor. She looked around the room, seeing the disgusted, judging faces of her wealthy peers, the people she had spent her entire life trying to impress and control. She saw Dr. Harrison Grant shaking his head with profound disappointment. She saw the remaining FBI agents spreading out across the back of the room, sealing the exits. Veronica was a survivalist above all else, and in that exact split second, she realized that the sinking ship was finally going under completely, and she was fully prepared to drown every single person around her just to keep her own head above water. Veronica suddenly burst into violent theatrical sobs. She covered her face with her trembling, manicured hands and collapsed dramatically against the edge of a white silk-covered table. She wailed loudly, forcing fake tears to stream down her perfectly contoured cheeks. She pointed a shaking finger toward the closed doors where Preston had just been dragged out. "He manipulated all of us," Veronica cried, her voice echoing through the quiet ballroom, playing the role of the devastated, grieving widow with terrifying, absolute precision. She stumbled forward, grabbing the arm of a nearby hospital administrator. "He lied to me," she sobbed hysterically, her voice cracking with manufactured pain. "He forged my late husband's signature without my knowledge. Preston told me Julian left everything to the holding company, and I believed him because he was my son-in-law and I trusted him. I had absolutely no idea he was hiding money in those offshore Cayman accounts. He took advantage of my grief and my fragile state of mind to steal my husband's legacy and frame this poor innocent girl." Veronica turned toward the lead FBI agent, a tall, imposing man standing near the center aisle. She clasped her hands together in a desperate, pleading gesture, looking up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "You have to believe me," she begged, her voice dropping to a fragile, pathetic whisper. "Preston orchestrated this entire massive fraud completely on his own. He was greedy and ruthless, and he forced me to go along with his corporate decisions. I am just a widow trying to protect my family. I am completely innocent." Before the federal agent could even respond, a high-pitched, furious scream ripped through the back of the ballroom. Brianna shoved her way violently through the crowd of stunned guests, her expensive designer dress tearing on the edge of a chair as she sprinted blindly toward her mother. Brianna's face was streaked with running mascara and pure, unhinged rage. Her entire luxurious life had just been violently ripped away. Her husband was going to federal prison, and now her own mother was publicly throwing him under the bus to save her own skin. "You absolute lying witch!" Brianna shrieked, her voice breaking into a harsh, guttural sob as she closed the distance between them. "You are not innocent. You planned every single piece of this." Veronica spun around, her fake tears instantly vanishing, replaced by a look of sheer panic as she saw her daughter charging at her. "Brianna, stop it!" Veronica hissed, stepping backward and trying to keep her voice low. "People are watching. You need to stay quiet right now and let me handle this." But Brianna was completely beyond reason. She lunged forward with both hands, raised her fingers curling into claws as she physically attacked her own mother in front of the entire hospital board. She grabbed handfuls of Veronica's perfectly styled hair and yanked backward, pulling her mother off balance. Veronica shrieked in genuine pain and terror, wildly swinging her arms to defend herself, as the two wealthy, aristocratic women completely descended into a vicious, trashy brawl right in the middle of the elegant gala. "You helped him do it!" Brianna screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice echoing off the high ceiling for every single federal agent and hospital executive to hear. "You are the one who hired the corporate hackers to scrub my father's personal servers. You are the one who locked Maya out of the estate. You poured the heavy industrial bleach all over Maya's medical jacket to permanently destroy the hospital crest and hide the evidence of her clinical rotations. You actively ruined her life. Veronica and you dragged Preston into your greedy, twisted plans because you were too lazy to do the dirty work yourself." Veronica violently shoved Brianna backward, her emerald gown ripping at the shoulder. "Shut your mouth, you stupid, ungrateful brat!" Veronica screamed, completely losing her careful, aristocratic facade. Her face was twisted into an ugly mask of pure, desperate rage. "I did everything for you. I secured your entire future, and this is how you repay me, by acting like a feral animal in public." Brianna stumbled backward, but immediately recovered, throwing herself right back at her mother. She slapped Veronica hard across the face, the sharp, cracking sound echoing sharply through the silent, staring crowd. "You ruined my husband," Brianna sobbed hysterically, grabbing Veronica's diamond necklace and pulling hard until the heavy clasp broke, sending diamonds scattering across the polished floor like cheap glass. "You used him to steal my father's money, and now you are trying to let him take the fall while you walk away clean. I will not let you do this to him. I will tell the authorities absolutely everything you did. The crowd of elite medical professionals physically backed away in sheer horror, watching the wealthiest, most powerful family in the city tear each other to bloody shreds. Veronica grabbed Brianna's wrists, her long acrylic nails digging deep into her daughter's skin as they struggled violently against a shattered dessert table. They knocked over tall crystal centerpieces and sent plates of untouched expensive food crashing to the ground. The facade of the perfect, wealthy, untouchable family was completely annihilated, replaced by the pathetic, ugly reality of two greedy criminals fighting over the scraps of their ruined lives. Two massive federal agents finally rushed forward, pushing through the shocked crowd and physically tearing the two women apart. They grabbed Brianna by the arms and dragged her backward as she continued to kick and scream violent accusations at her mother. Veronica stood panting heavily, her beautiful dress torn and ruined, her hair a tangled mess, her face bearing a bright red handprint from her daughter's vicious slap. She desperately tried to smooth down her ruined gown, taking deep, ragged breaths as she turned back to face the lead FBI agent. She forced a shaky, pathetic smile, trying to summon the last ounce of her manipulative charm. "You see what I have to deal with?" Veronica gasped, wiping real sweat from her forehead. She is completely hysterical. The stress of Preston's massive betrayal has clearly broken her mind. You cannot possibly listen to the ramblings of a traumatized girl agent. I am a respected member of this community, and I demand to be treated with the dignity my status requires. The lead FBI agent stood perfectly still, his expression entirely, completely blank. He looked at the ruined, desperate woman standing in front of him, completely unimpressed by her pathetic performance. He slowly pulled a thick stack of folded federal warrants from the inside pocket of his dark jacket. "Save it," the agent said, his deep voice cutting through the remaining tension in the room with absolute terrifying finality. "We found the offshore Cayman Island accounts registered directly in your name, Veronica. We have the digital signatures, the wire transfer receipts, and the encrypted emails proving you personally authorized the entire theft. You are under arrest for massive federal wire fraud and corporate espionage." The heavy steel handcuffs clicked loudly around Veronica's delicate wrists, a sharp, cold, metallic sound that completely cut right through her hysterical, performative sobbing. Two massive federal agents flanked her immediately, grabbing her arms and marching her roughly toward the Grand Plaza Hotel exit, right behind her equally disgraced son-in-law. She stumbled pathetically over the hem of her ruined emerald gown, her expensive diamond earrings swinging wildly, as she desperately tried to hide her face from the flashing cameras of the local medical press. The entire ballroom watched in stunned total silence as the arrogant architects of my father's destruction were finally dragged out into the cold night air, perfectly exposed for the greedy, ruthless criminals they truly were. Preston was shoved aggressively into the back of a dark federal SUV, his customized silk suit torn and soaked from the fire sprinklers, his face bruised and completely defeated. Veronica was forced into a separate vehicle, screaming a string of desperate threats that were instantly silenced as the heavy car doors slammed shut. The bright red and blue lights of the federal vehicles illuminated the luxurious hotel driveway, completely shattering their fake aristocratic world once and for all. I stood near the main stage, taking a long, slow breath as the heavy wooden doors swung shut behind the FBI agents. The suffocating, toxic weight that I had carried on my shoulders for the past 5 years completely vanished in an instant. Dr. Harrison Grant placed a warm, proud hand on my shoulder, giving me a silent nod of profound respect before turning back to address the bewildered hospital board. My work inside the ballroom was completely finished. I turned around and walked slowly down the center aisle, my midnight blue gown brushing softly against the thick carpet. The wealthy guests, the elite surgeons, and the arrogant pharmaceutical executives literally stepped aside to clear a path for me, their eyes filled with a new, undeniable reverence. They finally saw exactly who I was. I pushed through the heavy glass exit doors and walked out into the massive, brightly lit parking garage of the hotel, feeling the cool evening breeze against my skin. The air tasted incredibly sweet, I was halfway to the valet stand when I heard the frantic, desperate clicking of expensive heels running across the concrete pavement behind me. Maya, wait. Please, you have to wait for me. A familiar voice shrieked, echoing loudly through the empty parking structure. I stopped and turned around, watching as Brianna desperately chased after me. She looked absolutely pathetic. The untouchable golden child of the family was completely gone. Her designer silk dress was torn at the shoulder from her vicious physical fight with her mother, and her perfect blonde hair was a tangled, sweaty, messy disaster. Her expensive makeup was completely ruined, running down her cheeks in thick, dark streaks as she gasped heavily for air. She completely ignored the shocked stares of the hotel valet staff, throwing herself forward until she was standing right in front of me. Before I could even say a single word, she collapsed directly onto the hard, dirty concrete, dropping heavily to her bare knees in her ruined couture gown. She grabbed the edges of my dress, her hands shaking violently as she looked up at me with wide, terrified, bloodshot eyes. "Maya, please, you have to help me," Brianna sobbed, her voice cracking with pure desperate panic. "My husband is going to federal prison and my mother is completely ruined. The FBI agents seized everything we own. My bank accounts are already completely frozen and all my platinum credit cards are declining. I literally could not even pay the valet to bring my car around. I have absolutely nothing left, Maya. You have to tell the FBI that I was not involved in the fraud." "We are sisters, Maya. We grew up in the exact same house together. I did not know what Preston and my mother were doing. I swear to you, I had absolutely no idea they were stealing from your father. Please just let me stay in the massive estate. I have nowhere else to go and no money to my name. Just give me a little bit of time to figure things out and let me stay in the house." I stared down at her trembling, pathetic form, feeling absolutely zero pity for the spoiled, arrogant golden child who had actively participated in my total destruction. I gently but firmly pulled the fabric of my midnight blue gown out of her desperate, sweaty grip, taking a deliberate, careful step back so she could not touch me again. I looked at the ugly, dark streaks of mascara running down her chin and the desperate, pleading look in her eyes that I had never seen before. "You did not know," I asked, my voice echoing with crystal clear, absolute coldness. "You really want me to believe that you were just a sweet, ignorant bystander in all of this? You poured heavy industrial bleach all over my medical jacket to hide my clinical rotations, and you actively helped your mother hire illegal corporate hackers to scrub my father's personal servers. You drove a brand new $100,000 Range Rover that was bought directly with my father's stolen legacy. You went on lavish month-long vacations to Europe and wore flawless diamonds paid for entirely by his hard work and his stolen patents. You slept every single night in a luxury mansion that was paid for with his blood and sweat. You knew exactly where the massive amounts of money were coming from, Brianna, and you loved every single second of it until the exact moment the federal agents walked through those heavy wooden doors." She opened her mouth to argue, to spin another desperate, pathetic lie, but no sound came out. She just stayed on her knees on the cold concrete, staring up at me with a look of pure, horrifying realization. She finally understood that her golden privilege had completely evaporated, and her toxic tears held absolutely no power over me anymore. "You wanted to act like a ruthless corporate elite, Brianna." I continued, reaching slowly and methodically into my small velvet evening clutch. "You thought it was hilarious to watch me serve drinks in a cheap catering uniform while you paraded around stealing my entire life. So now you get to deal with the brutal, real-world consequences of your actions." I pulled out a crisp, formally folded legal document and dropped it directly onto her lap. It fluttered down slowly, landing perfectly against the torn, stained fabric of her ruined silk dress. She stared down at the thick black letters printed across the top of the page, her entire body trembling with fresh terror. "Oh, and about the house," I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, highly dangerous whisper. "My corporate attorney, Harper Reed, officially finalized the absolute reclamation of my father's original estate this morning. The deeds have already been transferred entirely back to my name. You have exactly 24 hours to pack up your cheap designer bags and vacate my property before I have the local sheriff physically throw you out onto the street. The cold morning sun was just beginning to break over the towering evergreen trees as my hired black SUV pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the Harrison family estate. The crisp morning air matched the exact steady rhythm of my beating heart. Riding in the passenger seat right next to me was Sheriff Davis, a tall, no-nonsense veteran of the county police force who had known my father for decades. He held a thick stack of court-authorized eviction papers resting on his lap, his expression grim and completely determined. For 5 agonizing years, I had been locked out of my own childhood home, forced to stare through these very gates, while Veronica and Brianna paraded around in absolute luxury, bought entirely with stolen money. Today, the heavy metal gates swung open smoothly as my driver punched in the private security override code that my brilliant corporate attorney Harper Reed had legally secured for me just hours ago. We drove slowly up the long, winding cobblestone driveway, lined with the beautiful blooming hydrangea bushes my father and I had planted together when I was just a little girl. The majestic 3-story brick mansion finally came into full view, looking exactly as perfect and imposing as the day I was violently thrown out into the street. But today, I was not returning as a broken, grieving daughter. I was returning as the true and rightful landlord. We stepped out of the heavy vehicle, the gravel crunching loudly under my expensive leather boots. Sheriff Davis walked right beside me, adjusting his heavy duty belt, as we approached the towering mahogany double front doors. I did not bother to knock or ring the doorbell. I simply reached into my dark wool coat pocket, pulled out the heavy vintage brass key that rightfully belonged to me, and slipped it directly into the lock. The deadbolt clicked with a loud, satisfying echo, and I pushed the heavy wooden doors wide open, stepping right into the massive grand marble foyer. The house was in a state of complete and utter chaotic panic. Expensive velvet suitcases were thrown haphazardly across the sweeping grand staircase, and high-end designer clothes were scattered across the polished hardwood floors like brightly colored trash. A chorus of frantic, hysterical yelling was echoing loudly down the hall, coming straight from the formal dining room. I walked slowly through the familiar hallways, letting the memories of my father wash over me. Every single painting on the wall and every antique rug on the floor had been carefully chosen by him long before Veronica ever sank her greedy claws into his life. The sheer disrespect of seeing the estate trashed like a cheap hotel room only fueled the cold, burning fire in my chest. The screaming grew louder as we approached the formal dining area where the massive crystal chandelier hung over the long mahogany table. Brianna was standing right in the middle of the room, surrounded by 3 terrified moving men that she had desperately hired at the absolute last minute. She was completely melting down, throwing a massive childish tantrum that perfectly mirrored her unhinged behavior from the gala the night before. She was wearing wrinkled silk pajamas, her face puffy and red, as she violently hurled an expensive imported crystal vase directly at the hardwood floor. The thick glass shattered into a million tiny sparkling pieces, but she did not even flinch. "I am not packing another single box!" she shrieked at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with sheer entitled rage. "You cannot make me leave this house because it is completely illegal, and Veronica is going to call her lawyers the second she gets out of federal custody, and they are going to arrest all of you for trespassing on private property, so you better just leave my things alone right now." I walked slowly into the dining room, the loud, sharp clicking of my boots instantly cutting through her frantic screaming. The terrified moving men immediately stepped back against the wall, recognizing the official presence of the county sheriff standing right behind me. The moving men did not wait to hear another word. They simply dropped the empty cardboard boxes they were holding and practically sprinted out the back door, wanting absolutely nothing to do with the federal-level crime scene unfolding in front of them. Sheriff Davis rested his hand on his radio, stepping forward to silently warn Brianna to keep her distance from me. Brianna spun around, her eyes widening in absolute horror as she saw me standing perfectly calm and collected in the exact center of her luxurious stolen world. "You have exactly 10 minutes left on the clock, Brianna," I said, my voice echoing clearly off the high vaulted ceilings. "I told you last night in the hotel parking lot that I was not playing games anymore. You are officially trespassing on private property, and Sheriff Davis is standing right here to ensure that you are physically removed from the premises if you refuse to walk out on your own 2 feet." Brianna's face twisted into an ugly mask of pure, desperate denial. She marched right up to me, her hands balled into tight, shaking fists, pointing a trembling manicured finger directly at my face. She tried to look intimidating, but she just looked like a pathetic, frightened child who had finally been caught stealing. "You are completely delusional, Maya," she yelled, her voice trembling with deep panic as she tried to maintain her broken illusion of power. "You cannot just hire a local sheriff to kick me out of my own home. This house belongs entirely to my mother. Her name is on the official marital deed. She was married to your father for 3 years before he died, and she inherited this entire massive estate as his legal surviving spouse. Veronica owns this property free and clear, and as her daughter, I have the absolute legal right to reside here forever. You are just a bitter, jealous orphan trying to steal what rightfully belongs to us. But my mother's expensive lawyers will tear your fake eviction notice into tiny little pieces before the sun goes down." I just stood there, letting her pathetic, empty threats wash over me like a light, meaningless breeze. The desperate entitlement rolling off her was absolutely suffocating, but it only made what was about to happen that much sweeter. I slowly reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, bound legal folder, sealed with heavy red wax and stamped with the official seal of the state Supreme Court. I did not even bother handing it to her. I just opened the thick folder and held up the heavy parchment paper so she could see the bold black ink for herself. Brianna squinted at the document, her eyes scanning the complex legal jargon as her breathing suddenly became very shallow and very fast. "You really think a brilliant corporate genius like my father would ever leave his generational legacy unprotected?" I asked quietly, watching the last remaining drops of color completely drain from her panicked face. "You think you are so smart, Brianna. You think your mother orchestrated the perfect, brilliant crime to steal his wealth and lock me out of my own life. But you did not know everything because Veronica did not know everything. My father knew exactly who your mother was from the very beginning. He put this entire house and the surrounding 80 acres of land into a locked, ironclad, irrevocable trust, strictly and entirely in my name, a full week before he ever signed that marriage certificate with your mother. Veronica's name was never actually put on the real deed. The document she showed you was completely fake. My father designed it so she could never touch a single brick of this estate. The only thing she actually did was blindly pay the massive luxury property taxes out of her own stolen accounts for the past 5 years straight, completely funding the upkeep of a house she never legally owned. So pack your cheap bags, Brianna, because your time in my house is officially up." Her mouth opened and closed in silent terror as the complete reality of her absolute ruin finally crushed her. She had nothing left. The crushing weight of the truth finally shattered the last remaining pieces of Brianna's arrogant mind. She scrambled backward on the expensive antique rug, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps as Sheriff Davis took a deliberate, heavy step forward, resting his hand firmly on his utility belt. "You heard the lady," the sheriff said, his voice deep and entirely unsympathetic. "The moving crew is gone, and your time is officially up. So I highly suggest you start grabbing whatever fits into your own 2 hands, because you are leaving this property right now." Brianna let out a pathetic, high-pitched sob, completely abandoning her ruined silk pajamas and scrambling frantically toward the grand staircase. She ran up the stairs, tripping over her own feet, desperately trying to salvage the remnants of her stolen, luxurious life. But there were no expensive leather suitcases left, and no staff to carefully pack her designer wardrobes. The only things available were the thick black industrial trash bags that the fleeing movers had dropped in the hallway. For the next hour, the sprawling mansion echoed with the pathetic sounds of the former golden child, violently shoving her expensive custom dresses, sparkling diamond shoes, and imported leather handbags into cheap plastic garbage bags. She was sweating profusely, her perfect blonde hair sticking to her face in wet, messy clumps as she frantically tied the plastic bags shut. Her acrylic nails were cracked and bleeding from the desperate, frantic labor she was never meant to do. Sheriff Davis stood at the top of the stairs with his arms crossed, watching her with absolute disgust as she dragged 4 massive, bulging trash bags toward the landing. She tried to carry them all at once, but her weak, privileged arms completely gave out. The heavy plastic bags tumbled down the grand marble staircase, bouncing violently against the polished steps and spilling expensive cosmetics and silk scarves all over the floor. Brianna fell to her knees, weeping hysterically as she scrambled to shove the items back into the torn plastic. "Get up and get out," Sheriff Davis barked, pointing toward the open front doors, where the bright morning sun was streaming into the foyer. Brianna grabbed the twisted plastic knots of the trash bags and began the long, excruciating walk of absolute shame. She dragged the heavy black bags across the marble floor, out the massive wooden front doors, and onto the rough, uneven cobblestones of the sprawling driveway. The sound of the plastic ripping and scraping against the stone echoed loudly through the quiet morning air. Her bare feet were bleeding, her muscles were screaming in pain, and her lungs burned with every single humiliating step she took down the long, winding path toward the main iron gates. But the absolute worst part of her eviction was not the physical pain, it was the audience. The massive Harrison estate was surrounded by the wealthiest families in the entire county, and news of Veronica's extremely public federal arrest had already spread through the elite neighborhood like wildfire. As Brianna dragged her garbage bags down the driveway, she looked up and saw dozens of her wealthy neighbors standing at the edge of their manicured lawns. The people she used to sip expensive champagne with, the women she used to look down on at the country club, and the families she had ruthlessly gossiped about, were all standing there holding their morning coffee cups, watching her complete and total destruction. They were pointing and whispering, their eyes filled with utter contempt and mocking pity. Brianna tried to hide her tear-stained face behind her messy hair, but there was nowhere to hide from the brutal, judging stares of the elite society that had just permanently exiled her. Suddenly, a loud, harsh ringing cut through her hysterical sobbing. She dropped the heavy plastic bags on the gravel and pulled her expensive gold smartphone from her pocket. The screen flashed with an incoming collect call from a federal detention facility. Her hands shook violently as she pressed the answer button, bringing the phone to her ear. "Brianna, thank God," Preston cried, his voice sounding incredibly small and terrified, echoing through the tinny speaker. "You have to help me, Brianna. The conditions in this holding cell are absolutely horrific, and the federal prosecutors are charging me with corporate treason and wire fraud. They are talking about 30 years in a maximum security prison. You have to wire the bail money right now. Call your mother and tell her to liquidate the offshore accounts immediately. I cannot stay in this place for another minute." Brianna let out a dark, bitter laugh that sounded more like a choked sob. Her chest heaved as she stared down at the ripped black garbage bags surrounding her bleeding feet. "There is no bail money, Preston!" she screamed, her voice cracking with pure venom and exhausted rage. "My mother is locked in a federal cell right next to you because you were too stupid to cover your tracks. The feds froze every single bank account we have, and Maya just legally evicted me from the estate. I am literally standing on the street with my clothes in trash bags because your greedy, pathetic incompetence ruined our entire lives. I have absolutely nothing left, and it is all your fault. Do not ever call this number again." She pulled the phone away from her ear and violently hurled it onto the hard cobblestones, watching the expensive glass screen shatter into tiny pieces right before she collapsed onto the ground in a sobbing, miserable heap. I stood silently on the grand front porch of my true home, leaning against the cool white marble pillar, watching her pathetic form shrink into the distance. The cool morning breeze brushed against my face, bringing the sweet scent of the blooming hydrangeas my father and I had planted so many years ago. Draped carefully over my arm was the ruined medical jacket Veronica had destroyed with industrial bleach. The harsh chemical stains that were once meant to symbolize the end of my career now felt like a brilliant trophy of my ultimate survival. The jacket was a reminder of every single cruel thing they had put me through, and every single obstacle I had completely destroyed to get my rightful legacy back. I took a deep breath, feeling the solid, unshakable weight of the generational estate beneath my feet. The 80 acres of land, the massive brick mansion, and my father's untarnished memory were finally completely safe. The quiet morning was gently interrupted by the smooth, humming sound of a sleek black town car turning into the driveway. The expensive vehicle completely ignored Brianna's sobbing form on the gravel, driving smoothly up to the front steps of the mansion. The rear door opened and Dr. Harrison Grant stepped out, adjusting his sharp-tailored suit as he walked purposefully up the stairs to join me on the porch. He looked at the ruined medical jacket draped over my arm and then looked up at my face, a profound look of absolute respect shining in his kind eyes. "Good morning, Maya," Dr. Grant said, his voice steady and filled with a new quiet authority. "I wanted to deliver the news to you personally before the press gets hold of the official statement." The hospital board held an emergency early morning meeting to completely sever all corporate ties with Preston and Veronica. They are permanently removing the Blackwood name from every single medical building in the state. But that is not the only reason I am here. He took a step closer, pulling a thick, cream-colored envelope from his jacket pocket. "The board of directors does not just want to reinstate your clinical rotations, Maya. With the entire corrupt leadership structure completely removed, they need someone with absolute integrity, pure brilliance, and the true Harrison vision to lead the company into the future. The board unanimously voted this morning. They want you to completely take over as the sole acting CEO of Jackson Innovations effective immediately." The towering glass doors of the Jackson Innovations headquarters slid open smoothly, and the crisp, frigid air conditioning washed over my face as I stepped confidently into the massive marble lobby. It was exactly 8 o'clock on a Monday morning, and the entire atmosphere of the corporate building was absolutely electric with pure panicked chaos. I did not wear my blue medical scrubs today. Instead, I wore a razor-sharp tailored charcoal power suit with a crisp white silk blouse, my hair pulled back into a severe professional knot. My expensive heels clicked rhythmically and loudly against the pristine imported Italian marble floor, sending a very clear, undeniable warning signal echoing through the vast open space. Corporate employees stopped completely dead in their tracks, holding their hot coffee cups suspended in mid-air, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. They had all watched the local news coverage obsessively over the weekend. They all knew exactly what had happened to Preston and Veronica, and they knew exactly who I was. Harper Reed walked perfectly in step beside me, holding her thick black leather portfolio tightly against her side. Her face was a cold, unreadable mask of absolute legal authority. We stepped into the private executive elevator, and the heavy steel doors slid shut, immediately blocking out the frantic, terrified whispers of the busy lobby. We rode in complete absolute silence all the way up to the 50th floor, watching the digital numbers climb higher and higher into the skyline. When the metal doors finally opened, Dr. Harrison Grant was waiting for us in the luxurious executive reception area, his hands clasped firmly behind his back, and a small, knowing, proud smile resting on his face. "The main boardroom is completely full, Maya," he said quietly, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet, empty corridor. "Preston's entire executive team is waiting inside right now, and they are heavily sweating through their expensive custom suits." I pushed open the heavy frosted glass double doors to the main executive boardroom and strode confidently inside without a single ounce of hesitation. The massive, luxurious room was lined entirely with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the beautiful, sprawling city skyline, but the men sitting around the polished mahogany table were definitely not looking at the stunning view. There were 12 of them in total, all older, wealthy, arrogant men that Preston had personally handpicked to run my father's brilliant legacy directly into the ground. They were the selfish, greedy architects of his fraudulent empire, the men who had gladly taken massive illegal cash bonuses while intentionally cutting corners on life-saving medical research. They stopped talking the exact second I walked in their faces, instantly draining of all color as I walked directly to the head of the long table. I did not sit down. I simply placed my hands flat against the cool, polished wood and looked every single one of them directly in the eye, letting the heavy, suffocating silence stretch out to break their nerves. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice perfectly steady and completely devoid of any warmth or forgiveness. As you all know by now, Preston Blackwood has been arrested by federal authorities for massive corporate fraud and grand wire theft. What you might not know is that as of yesterday morning, the hospital board of directors unanimously appointed me as the sole acting CEO of Jackson Innovations. A collective, terrified gasp rippled through the stuffy room, and a few of the older men shifted extremely uncomfortably in their high-backed leather chairs, avoiding my gaze completely. The man sitting directly to my right, an older, heavy-set executive named Richardson, who had been Preston's chief financial officer, nervously cleared his throat and tried to offer a patronizing, sickeningly sweet smile. Now Maya Richardson started, his voice dripping with fake, condescending sympathy. "We all completely understand that this is a very highly emotional and confusing time for your family, but running a multi-billion-dollar medical tech company requires decades of intense corporate experience. You are just a young girl in medical school. Perhaps we can arrange a generous weekly financial stipend for you, while the adults here handle the complex corporate transition period." I did not blink, and I did not look away. I turned my head slowly and locked my eyes directly onto Richardson's sweating, panicked face. "My name is not Maya. To you," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous icy register that made him physically flinch backward. "To you, I am Chief Executive Officer Jackson. And as for your decades of corporate experience, Richardson Harper Reed has spent the last 48 solid hours doing a completely deep forensic dive into your personal accounting records. We know exactly how much money you accepted in illegal offshore kickbacks to officially approve those faulty surgical lasers last year. We have the digital paper trail proving you actively helped Preston hide my father's stolen patents in fake overseas shell companies. You are not handling any transition period, Richardson, because you are officially terminated, effective immediately." Richardson opened his mouth to argue, but his voice completely failed him, as two massive armed corporate security guards silently entered the boardroom, standing directly behind his expensive chair. I turned my attention back to the rest of the terrified, silent men sitting frozen at the table. In fact, I continued pulling a thick stack of printed termination papers from Harper's portfolio and tossing them carelessly onto the center of the mahogany wood. "Every single one of you who sat at this table and gladly profited off the destruction of my father's legacy is entirely finished here today. You severely compromised the ethical integrity of Jackson Innovations, and you gladly traded innocent human lives for luxury sports cars and exotic vacation homes. You are all completely fired without severance, and the federal authorities have already been provided with every single shred of your illegal accounting practices. Pack your desks and get out of my building right now before I have security physically drag you out by your expensive silk ties." The room erupted into panicked, desperate shouting and pathetic begging, but the security guards quickly stepped forward, forcing the disgraced, corrupt executives out of their comfortable chairs and aggressively ushering them toward the glass doors. I watched them leave, feeling a deep, incredibly satisfying warmth spreading through my chest as the toxic, corrupt rot was finally completely purged from my father's beloved company. Once the room was entirely empty and the glass doors slid shut, I turned back to Dr. Grant and Harper Reed. "It is time to bring in the new team," I said quietly. The doors opened again, and 5 brilliant, highly diverse medical professionals walked confidently into the boardroom. They were the ethical researchers, dedicated scientists, and brilliant administrative leaders that Preston had maliciously fired or passed over for promotions simply because they refused to play his dirty illegal games. They took their seats at the table, bringing an immediate, beautiful sense of pure, clean integrity back into the room. Dr. Grant took a seat near the head of the table, looking up at me with a very serious, professional expression. "Maya, the board is completely thrilled to have you taking the helm," he said, his voice echoing warmly in the quiet room. "But we do have to firmly address the practical logistics. You are currently completing your highly demanding medical rotations. Running this entire massive corporation is an extremely exhausting full-time job. The board wants to know if you are planning to take an indefinite leave of absence from medical school to focus entirely on the CEO position." I shook my head firmly, placing my hands on the back of my heavy leather chair. "Absolutely not," I replied, my voice ringing with total, absolute certainty. My father built this incredible company because he fundamentally understood the real daily life and death struggles of frontline medical care. He was a brilliant, caring doctor, first, and a corporate leader, second. Preston failed completely because he only cared about the greedy profit margins and never actually cared about the sick patients. I absolutely refused to choose between my father's corporate legacy and my own personal dream of practicing medicine. I will be a doctor, and I will be the CEO of this company. I will dictate my own rigorous schedule, and my medical school clinical rotations will be fully accommodated while I run this executive board. I will integrate my frontline clinical knowledge directly into our research and development programs, ensuring that Jackson Innovations never again loses sight of its true life-saving purpose. Dr. Grant smiled broadly, nodding his head in complete absolute agreement, with tears of pride shining in his eyes. The new executive team immediately broke into genuine loud applause, the sound filling the boardroom with a beautiful, heavy sense of triumph and fresh, hopeful energy. The meeting concluded with a brilliant rush of productive scheduling, and as the new executives filed out to begin their massive transition work, I finally sank down into the heavy leather chair at the head of the table, letting out a long, exhausted but completely happy breath. The room was completely silent again. Harper Reed stayed behind, standing quietly near the edge of the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city. She walked slowly back to the table, carrying her leather portfolio. She did not say a single word as she reached inside and pulled out a small sealed white envelope. She gently slid the envelope across the polished mahogany wood until it rested perfectly right in front of me. The thick white paper looked incredibly old and slightly yellowed at the edges. "What is this?" I asked, my voice dropping to a quiet, confused whisper as I stared down at the blank paper. Harper looked down at me, her sharp professional eyes softening with an unexpected deep emotional sadness. "The FBI completely raided Preston's personal home safe late last night," she explained softly, her voice barely carrying across the table. "They found a heavy steel lockbox completely hidden behind a false panel in the wall. Preston had been keeping it completely hidden from everyone for years, including Veronica and Brianna." She tapped her perfectly manicured finger gently against the corner of the small envelope. "It is a handwritten letter from your father, Maya," she said, her voice breaking just a fraction of an inch. "It is completely sealed, and it has your name written directly on the front.